Tenekoto katoa. Welcome back to the Youth Factor, where we aim to see the world through the lens of the future. I'm your host, Alex Jung, and I hope to take you on a virtual journey around the world where stories untold will be shared, current issues will be discussed, and the voices of the youth will be heard. Today, we explore Southeast Asia. Nicknamed the Pearl of the Orient, this country is a tropical paradise waiting to be explored. With stunning beaches and a diverse marine ecosystem, it is the perfect place to go island hopping and snorkel. Absolutely stunning food, including mango floats, adobo, and sinigang, and home to Jollibee. This country has the best cuisine. This nation is perfect for budget traveling with a low cost of living and affordable accommodation options. It is indeed the perfect holiday spot. Today, we explore the Philippines. And joining me today is our guest host, Jed Canlobo. Jed is a researcher activist from Manila and Laguna, fighting for a range of advocacies concerning different communities in the Philippines. Currently, he is working as a political campaign strategist for several political candidates from the Progressive Party. He believes that by doing this, he gets the chance to mend the broken political system in his country. Welcome, Jed.
Hello, Alex. Thank you so much for having me in your podcast.
I'm extremely grateful to have you on the podcast, Jed. Before we begin discussing some political issues, could you briefly introduce yourself and the Philippines and some information about Pinoy culture?
Sure. For your listeners, hi everyone. I am Jed. Aside from the things said in the introduction, I'm also an IB student studying at LPC UWC in Hong Kong. I super love politics, but also filmmaking. I am from the Philippines, a country composed of thousands of islands, and is also very dynamic and diverse. As for the Filipino culture, I'd say that it really depends on the area. However, one thing that unites us is our resilience. Also, before we start, I would just like to say that this is not to put the Philippines in bad light. This is just to purely to inform the public about what is going on in the Philippines. I also did not prepare a script for my answers, so bear with me because everything that I'll be saying is just from my prior knowledge, experiences, and the research studies that I have conducted with different organizations before. Again, thank you so much for having me today, Alex, and I hope to have a meaningful discussion with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jed. And once again, I think you're really right with the point that in doing this, nobody's trying to put their country down. I think it's just to raise awareness on issues because no country is perfect. And I think this is a perfect opportunity. So let's begin with it then. The main political issue discussed today will be on disinformation in the Philippines. And it appears to be a very, very critical issue. So the news outlet Rappler, the only independent news outlet in the Philippines, where the founder Maria Ressa won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2021, has been uncovering sources of disinformation in several instances. A University of Oxford study found the Philippines had the highest level of misinformation from 12 countries in Asia investigated. So, briefly, from your experiences, how and why is this a critical issue?
I believe that it is very, very important issue that a lot of people should be aware of because this is an atomic bomb that is about to um, basically implode any time soon in our faces. And I describe it like that because I have personally seen its impact on my country and its democracy. With the advancement of technology, Alex, especially the evident dependence of people on social media, malevolent people, especially politicians, have come up with a way to use technology to manipulate people and subvert democracies around the world through disinformation. From the usage of data obtained from Facebook profiles, the creation of troll farms, and to taking advantage of the TikTok algorithm, this information has become a force to be reckoned with. It is a virus slowly spreading without a lot of people knowing that can certainly erase history and subsequently manipulate and put people in harm.
Hmm. So, let's start off by talking about the Filipino government then, because this is kind of the roots of where this issue kind of begins.
Yeah.
So, to unpack this, could you please discuss this authoritarian rule in the Philippines? Because it's definitely not very democratic at the moment. That can be seen as a form of almost dynastic rule. And who are the central figures involved at the moment?
Sure. Due to patronage politics, which is the value system where one gains favor, promotion, or political appointment through family affiliation, also known as nepotism or
Mm,
friendship, as opposed to one's merit, the Philippines has been under the rule of different political families for a very, very long time. Most of our presidents came from political dynasties whose presence can be seen in different provinces and areas in the Philippines. This is the same problem which propagates a system where there is a lack of competition and an evident presence of political inequality. Studies also show that the presence of political dynasties in the Philippines, is also one of the many reasons as to why corruption is still very rampant in the country.
Mm,
Because of this, our democracy is currently dying, to say it at least.
mm,
As for the central figures involved, there are certainly many. The Marcoses, the Dutertes, Aquinos, Rojas, to say to name at least some. But according to Rappler, there are at least 163 political dynasties, if I'm not mistaken. Again, 163 political dynasties in the Philippines that were formulated and retained after the 2019 Philippine midterm elections.
mm,
This explains the tight-knit relationship between known political dynasties and oligarchs in the Philippines, and also the reason as to why political dynasties are very rampant in the country, because as their power grows, their economic interests also grow bigger. Um, which combined can create a political climate composed of patronizations and circulation of power within the same families.
mm,
This subsequently creates political and economic inequalities that affect the true democratic process in my country, the Philippines.
mm. So I think the issue of this undemocratic process is not so much about the electoral process, because that seems to be democratic, but it's the disinformation and the whole idea of nepotism that makes this whole process a flawed democracy. So
To an extent, yes.
yeah. So let's talk about the 2019 judicial killings under President Duterte. So how has political disinformation covered up the true reality and extent to which these tragic incidents occurred? Could you start off by maybe contextualizing what those judicial killings were?
Sure. Basically, I think before I talk about the judicial killings, I think it's also very important to take note that Duterte actually won because of disinformation. The same mechanism that was used in the Duterte's presidential campaign was the mechanism that was used to help Cambridge Analytica, which was the firm that exposed a lot of misdoings when it comes to campaigns and everything. It was the same firm that helped Donald Trump win the election
Oh,
in the
wow.
United States
Mm,
and also made Brexit possible. So it was this information that catapulted President Duterte into presidency. And it was also this information that helped him cover up the things that happened during his own drug war. So basically, by disseminating misleading information and propaganda that misrepresented the truth about the situation, this information significantly contributed to hiding the true scope of the Philippine drug war, also known as the Oplanto Camp. So in 2016, President Duterte declared the drug war with the goal of eradicating drug use and trafficking here in the Philippines.
wow.
However, the campaign has come under heavy fire for its violent tactics, which include extrajudicial murders and violations of human rights, particularly the right to life and right to a fair trial. The Philippine government and its supporters have utilized deception to mislead the public opinion and hide the true scope of the violence and human rights violations committed during the campaign in order to counter the negative press and criticism of the drug war, all with the help of this information being disseminated through different platforms, particularly Facebook and YouTube. For
Mm,
instance, misinformation on the number of drug suspects has been circulated by government officials, even government officials and others who support them, asserting that the number is significantly lower than what independent media outlets such as Rappler.com and
mm,
human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have reported. In addition, they have presented drug users and sellers as dangerous criminals who should be put behind bars rather than as sufferers from destitutions, addiction, and structural injustice, which we all know is not true because I think, in my own opinion, a drug war should be treated like a public health crisis more than a security crisis.
mhm,
Furthermore, the government has used legal and illegal tactics to suppress journalists, activists, and other critics who have revealed the truth about the drug war by branding them enemies of the state and accusing them of doing so. In the Philippines, we call this doing or like this mechanism red tagging. As
mm,
a result, the reality regarding the Philippine drug war has been distorted, allowing the government to continue its campaign of violence and repression with impunity while stifling dissent and criticism. And I think to end it, I think it's also very important for the listeners to know that the Philippines still has a case in the International Criminal Court, and it is about the drug war of President Duterte and the extrajudicial killings that happened during his term.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that answer, Jed. So we've got a snapshot of 2019, but now let's move to something a bit more recent. So the 2022 election, and I've spent some time on Rappler looking into sources, and I can really tell that this is where disinformation just it reaches a whole new level. I mean, it's on YouTube, it's on Facebook, it's on Twitter. So what type of disinformation is actually being spread? And with well over 70% of Filipinos on social media very regularly, how is this a key factor in affecting election results?
Thank you for that very good question and timely. As President Marcos, our current president, will be having a State of the Nation address on the 4th of July. So it's just a few days from
Mm,
now,
wow.
which means that it has been since a year since he was elected as the President of the Republic of the Philippines. And
Mm,
before we talk about how this information catapulted him to the presidency, let me just briefly introduce him to the listeners of this podcast.
mm,
Bongbong Marcos Jr., our current president, is a Filipino politician and the son of the late Philippine dictator Ferdinand Marcos. Marcos Jr. is known for his family's controversial legacy, particularly his father's authoritarian rule, which was marked by widespread corruption, human rights abuses, and martial law from 1972 to 1981. His father was actually the first president that the Filipino people ousted during the EDSA People Power Revolution 1. And
mm,
I encourage everyone to do their own research on the Marcos family, as it is very important for them to be aware of the atrocities and injustices this family has caused to the Filipino people.
mm,
Now, a lot of y'all are probably thinking, how did he get elected, given his family's background, recent background, and everything? Recent studies show that Bongbong Marcos was one of the many people that benefited from disinformation among the presidential candidates during the elections. To say it at least, it was this information that catapulted him to the presidency. One thing that Bongbong Marcos did to make his campaign a successful one was to remain relevant even after he lost the vice presidential election to the former vice president Leni Robredo in 2016.
mhm.
After he lost the election by a very, very small margin, he started to create troll farms and hire influencers to make posts and engage with different people on different social media platforms to somehow, frame the former Vice President Robredo as quote unquote fake vice president. Of course, his loyalists and people who basically helped him with the campaign believed this. Um, and people who were persuaded by the trolls and the influencers that he hired also fell for it, directing hatred and harm towards the former Vice President Leni Robredo, whilst he sustains a big following. That is the first thing that he did after he lost the 2016 election. And I actually attended a marketing boot camp after the election, and a lot of advertisement experts said that this was the first thing that he did to plan his presidential campaign 6 years
Wow.
before he decided to run. So,
So,
you see that strategy and you see how he utilized this information to actually make him win. And he prepared for a very, very long time to bring his family back into power. Now, circling back to our topic, he also started to erase historical facts and rebranded his family by disseminating false information about what had occurred during his father's presidency. There were a lot of information being spread in different social media platforms, particularly TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube,
mm,
about the Marcos family. And in Facebook, you would see posts of people labeling his father, the former dictator, as the best president our country has ever had.
mm,
Which sounds very ridiculous, but people fell for it because their logic was, if his father could do it, so can he. Because a lot of people believe that his father made the president the biggest country in Asia during his time, which is very incorrect.
mm,
But this is not true because a lot of what I said earlier, during his father's presidency, there were a lot of injustices and corruption the Filipino people up until now are paying for, because his father, you can see him in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most corrupt politician that had ever lived in the whole world.
Wow.
And since there were a lot of ill-gotten materials that they obtained from the presidency, the Filipino people are still paying for it because we had to um, get some loan from different countries because of what their family did to the Philippines. You know,
Mm,
another famous propaganda narrative that was shared was about their gotten gold, just like what I was saying earlier, and how their family owns a lot of gold, which in the Philippines we call it Taliano gold, and how Marcos promises to share this to everyone if he wins. Although he did not say this, troll accounts affiliated with his campaign team were asserting this. It sounds very ridiculous, but people, again, fell for it. Why? Because this propaganda was targeting people from underprivileged backgrounds, people who did not learn the background of the Marcos family and weren't aware of the fact that the Italiano does not exist. Due to the fact that they aren't able to obtain higher education due to the incompetence of the government, they tend to believe these things. Moreover, since they do not have certain resources on the internet to verify if the information that they were receiving was true, they fell for it.
mm,
And lastly, disinformation was also used to target his greatest competitor during the presidential election, the former Vice President Robredo. She
mm,
was named a lot of things. Her interviews were caught out of context and then disseminated across social media platforms. False information about her late husband was also disseminated and her family, and this significantly impacted her campaign profusely. And I know this because I volunteered for her and we were able to see the numbers and how this information really damaged her reputation, how this information made her numbers drop.
mm,
So you can see how this information really played in the recent elections in the Philippines. And in conclusion, as to what happened during the 2022 presidential elections,
mm,
President Marcos and his team, knowing that the Philippines is a social media capital of the world, and given the ever dynamic attitude of the Filipino people towards social media, launched a campaign across different platforms which is filled with disinformation, which subsequently catapulted him to the presidency.
mm,
And that is basically how they utilize disinformation to make him win.
mm. Thank you, Jed, for that answer. And I'm really glad that you picked up on a really important point, which is that a lot of people can question, why do people fall for disinformation so easily? I mean, it kind of works in the same way with cults, right? People question, how do people actually fall for this type of stuff? It's often very bizarre. You talk about the gold myth, that sounds really, really bizarre.
True.
But you also mentioned that actually the people that disinformation is targeted at are very vulnerable people and very vulnerable
Yeah,
populations. So it makes sense that such a large part of the population is falling for disinformation. And when you have corrupt politicians like Marcos in power, it's just natural for so many people to aimlessly just fall for it. And I think that's what makes it really, really dangerous. So that
that's
kind of
true.
leads to my, oh, sorry, you can,
No, I just want to say that that's very, very true. And it's very, I knew when I was saying those things about why people fall for it, I
mm,
knew that it was very important to say it because during the election, a lot of people were targeting these people, labeling them as, I won't say that word, but they were calling them very demeaning and they were belittling them because they were from underprivileged backgrounds and they were basically blaming them for making Marcos the president of the Philippines. But these are the same people who actually should be considered as victims of
absolutely.
this system that forces them into thinking that it might be true because of course they did not have access to good education that a lot of people in the Philippines had because of the system that puts them into where they're at right now.
Mm. And so I think there needs to be a level of sympathy towards the people falling for disinformation rather than criticism. So my follow-up question really is, what are the preventative measures to stop disinformation from spreading? And has this been effective at all?
In the Philippines, if I'm not mistaken, it's called Republic Act 10175,
Mhm.
or also known as the Anti-Cybercrime Law. It's basically a law that aims to hold people sharing fake news or false information accountable. However, in the Philippines, our justice system is very rigged. It's not reliable at all. And if you are a person from from an underprivileged background, you probably won't have a stand to fight for your rights. And it's very unfortunate that we have that justice system. And because of that, um, laws like this are not being um, properly followed by a lot of people, and not a lot of people actually know about this because it's not being shared to people. People are not educated well about this thing. However, civil organizations such as Project Gunita and Verifiles launch a campaign against disinformation. And what they do is that they collect a lot of files that aim to basically counter the disinformation narratives that are being circulated online. For example, about the Italiano gold, they collected a lot of articles from the 1970s saying that the Italiano gold does not exist, and they were sharing it to different platforms. So it's just basically a social media campaign that aims to counter disinformation. And these are the same organizations that are also being targeted by the government, which is very ridiculous, honestly, because these are the people who are trying to protect the truth. However, they are being silenced. Why? Because a lot of politicians in the Philippines still, up until now, benefit from disinformation. And it's a very, very sad fact. But the only thing that the public could do right now is to support these organizations, such as Verifiles and Project Gunita. If they have a little money, maybe they could also donate to these people, because these are the people who left their corporate jobs. Because I know the founders of Project Bonita, they left their corporate job. Some of them had really good corporate job, and they had to let go of those things to focus on this, to safeguard the truth, to actually hold the line and protect the democracy in the Philippines, which is very admirable if you're going to ask me. So there are certain things that civil organizations are doing. Media outlets such as Rappler.com also launched a series where they fact check. Basically, fact checking is a method where they look into certain posts of individuals made in different platforms and see if they made a false narrative, if they were able to share a false information to certain groups of people or to their following. And they basically create a network of people to help them do this. And it's called move.ph, which I am very proud of. Very proud of this. I'm part of move.ph, and we do fact checking up until now. So I think if people are going to be aware of this, maybe these organizations, these methods to counter fake news can probably be stronger, much bigger, and more effective when it comes to mitigating the problem related to disinformation.
Absolutely. So I think that's on a very domestic level, and I think that you've established what the key issue is and what we can do to solve it. But also, a lot of Filipinos move abroad as domestic migrant workers, and many domestic workers fall victim to unethical agencies and horrible loan sharks. So, what do you think the influence of political disinformation and the lack of cyber safety from the Philippines contribute to Filipinos, not just in the Philippines, but abroad as well?
I think that's a very important question, since right now in the Philippines, a recent study was launched by a group of professors saying that overseas Filipino workers, migrant workers all around the world, are actually the biggest target of this information, since social media is being used by these people to battle with homesickness. They're always in their social media accounts, and they're the number one target of this information, for the reason being that they have a lot of time to spend on their social media accounts.
Mhm.
And the algorithm in Facebook, particularly in Facebook and TikTok, helps the architects of this information to target these people, because they know that they're always in social media. And so these architects of this information that help politicians or other organizations target these people, which is very unfortunate, because first, let's go back to the reason as to why they're always in social media, and that is
Mm.
to help them with homesickness, to communicate with their loved ones in the Philippines or in their home countries, to share what they're doing in their country that they're in, and to share it to the people back home. That's the main reason as to why they're always in social media. However, architects of this information saw this as an opportunity to target these people. And going back to that topic of a lot of Filipinos falling for unethical agencies and hollow loan sharks, this information also adds up to this, because since they're the number one target of this information, a lot of people fall for it because they don't have enough access to certain resources to verify if that agency is actually a legit one, if those loan sharks won't put them into danger. And because these people um, actually attained the proper, no, the standard education here in the Philippines, which means that loan sharks, financial literacy, ethics and everything weren't discussed. They are not aware of these things, and they tend to fall for these things. And that is why this keeps on happening to a lot of Filipino domestic workers. So
Mm.
yeah.
Mm. I think it's very unfortunate happening. And I mean, you and I both live in Hong Kong, and we see this as a very close and personal issue. So, one final question. So, disinformation, it's sometimes hard to find how is this an infringement on human rights, but it certainly is. So, how is disinformation an infringement on human rights, and who should be held accountable, and how are they going to be held accountable for it?
You know, Alex, because it can impair the rights to freedom of expression, to
Mm.
receive truthful information, and to take part in political processes. This information certainly can be seen as a violation of human rights.
Mm.
Where people may be deceived and make decisions that are not in their best interest when they are exposed to inaccurate or misleading information,
Mm.
which can have a detrimental effect on both the person and the society as a whole. This information also helps with the dissemination of hate speech and violence. We can see this. We were able to see this rather in the January 6th insurrection that happened in Washington, D.C. It was Facebook that was used to gather a lot of people and make that manpower invade the Capitol.
Mm.
So basically, this information can violate a person's right to life, liberty, and security. This information may occasionally be used to target particular groups based on their race, religion, or traits, which can also result into prejudice and marginalization. For example, in the 2022 election, former Vice President Robredo was the only woman rather in the race, and she was going against 9 men, and she was always attacked by these people based on her gender and sex. And it's because of this information that made these people actually fall for those narratives that these people are the people that she was competing against with
Mm.
fall for, well, like the supporters of the people that she was competing against fall for it, so you can see how like this information can actually infringe upon the human rights and basic rights of other people.
Mm.
As for who we should hold accountable for, I think we should, in my own opinion, we should hold the architects of this information, those people who are spreading this information, accountable, because these are the same people who know that they are spreading misleading information, but they still choose to do it. Why? Probably because they earn a lot of money from it. Recent studies here in the Philippines show that architects of disinformation that help several politicians win different elections, be it a local election or a national election, are actually professors, people with PhDs, executives, people who have their own companies, but they don't want to be put into TVs. They don't want their names to be seen because they want to be put in the shadows of those politicians and help them silently. Why? Probably because they know that what they're doing is unjustifiable. That what they're doing, manipulating people, is in no way. right and will never be right.
Mm,
So I think we should hold these people accountable more than those people who are being forced by the society to be um, peddlers of this information. Because if I may just share this, in the Philippines, a lot of people were, especially during the 2022 elections, a lot of people were targeting troll accounts users. Although they know that they are disseminating disinformation, these people are just victims of the kind of system that the Filipinos are in, because they're being forced to be a troll farm owner, to actually hold troll accounts in order for them to provide food for their families, because the employment rate here in the Philippines is very low, and that's probably their only way to feed their own families. So I think for the listeners, instead of holding these people accountable, let's hold the architects of this information, the people who have privileges already, who have good educational background, accountable, and make them question why they chose to use their own prerogatives, the privileges that they have, the educational background that they have, and why did they use these things to generate, you know, to generate a campaign filled with disinformation that can manipulate people.
mm. I think it's disheartening that the most privileged and the most well-off people in the Philippines are targeting the least well-off people and the most vulnerable people through
Yeah.
disinformation. And I think that's something that the whole society does need to change. Okay, so thank you once again, Jed, for joining in this episode and representing the Philippines. This wraps this episode up for the Youth Factor. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you look forward to the next stop of our journey, Afghanistan. Thank you.